On the Great British Bake Off, which I continue to watch, though I'm aware that this dates me, there is Bread Week. We, in the churches that follow the lectionary, have Bread Summer. Alone of all the Gospels, St. John, having told the story of the feeding of the 5,000, one of the best-known miracles of Jesus, takes that story as a starting point for a long and complex theological exploration of who Jesus is and what that miracle means for those who follow him, known as the Bread of Life discourse, discourse meaning speech or sermon. So in church, over 6 weeks in the August of every third year, we hear the 71 verses of this chapter split up across those weeks into bread season, a chance to think deeply about what it means that Jesus said, "I am the bread of life." We have reached week 3. In the story so far, Jesus had crossed to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. A crowd of 5,000 people had followed him there, and he had fed them, all of them, with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He had crossed back across the Sea of Galilee, incidentally walking on water. And as we join the gospel narrative today, the crowd realize he's gone and chase him back. We might expect then, 2 weeks in, that the crowd have some kind of idea of what's going on. They've really committed to searching for Jesus. They've crossed the lake twice. We might expect that as the Bread of Life discourse begins to unfold in a question and answer format between the crowd and Jesus, we will see their developing understanding and their developing faith. But we don't. Jesus tells them, "You are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves." The crowd had indeed committed to searching for Jesus, but it doesn't really count if what they're looking for is not Jesus, but their dinner. And when they talk to Jesus, they show that they haven't even understood what they've seen. They say, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness." Yesterday, these people had followed Jesus across a whole lake because they saw the signs he was doing for the sick, healing miracles. And there, Jesus had given them food, 5,000 people, each as much as he wanted. This morning, they'd followed him back across the lake, and now they've forgotten all of that, and they ask him for a sign like the manna in the wilderness, a sign like the sign Moses gave, which we heard about in our first reading, a sign so that they can believe him. This is a really impressive level of collective amnesia, of completely missing what should be a fairly clear connection between the sign they want, the manna in the wilderness, and the sign they've just seen, the abundance of bread and fish with which Jesus fed them not 24 hours before. So I wonder why. Bread, in John's Gospel and in the New Testament as a whole, is rarely just bread. And those who eat the bread that Jesus offers are rarely simply eating food. That's what Jesus is trying to explain to this crowd, which insistently asks the wrong question and steers the conversation in the wrong direction. And I wonder if part of the reason that they do this is that they are trying to avoid what, at the back of their minds, they know. That having eaten the bread that Jesus offered, they have the option of a new life opening in front of them, an option that they would perhaps rather ignore, an option which they try to ignore by denying what they've seen and tasted and understood, by implying that whatever Jesus did over there on the other side of the lake was at another time and in another place. "Sir, give us this bread always. Not that bread, not the bread that we've had that invited us somehow in a way that we don't quite want to think about into new life, but bread that affirms us in the life that we're quite happy living here just as we are." But Jesus is the bread of life. Bread isn't just bread, it's Jesus, the bread of life. As bread, for which read food in general, is necessary for physical life, so Jesus is necessary for spiritual life. And the crowd misunderstands him. The crowd turns away from the invitation which was contained in the physical bread which had fed their bodies to receive Jesus, the spiritual bread who will nourish their souls. In the Gospels of St. Matthew and St. Luke, when Jesus is asked to teach his disciples to pray, he offers them a model prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Give us today our daily bread. Bread meaning not just bread, but all our physical needs. When Jesus teaches his people to pray, that includes a prayer that God will supply our physical needs, just as Jesus supplied the needs of the 5,000, offering them bread and fish out of God's abundance. But bread isn't just bread, it's also a calling. When God supplies our physical needs, God also reminds us that we are not the only people who have physical needs. We might be so used to it that we skip over "give us today our daily bread" without really thinking about it, confident that in half an hour or so there will be biscuits and coffee, and at home the fridge is full. But there are people who pray the Lord's Prayer in this city, as well as in many other parts of the world, who do so with a very different awareness. Those who pray, "Give us today our daily bread," in the knowledge that without God's gift of food, there will be nothing or not enough to eat. If, when we pray, "Give us today our daily bread," we do so knowing that God has already given us that bread and more, God is calling us to take our part in answering the prayers of our neighbours. Because bread isn't just bread. In the mid-20th century, there was a reasonably influential view that when Jesus fed the 5,000, he didn't actually do anything miraculous. Instead, by starting to share his 5 loaves and 2 fish, he shamed the crowd into getting out their own packed lunches and sharing them with their neighbours. I do not believe that's what happened when Jesus fed the 5,000. I believe Jesus really and miraculously took 5 loaves and made them a demonstration of God's abundance. But I do believe that it's a nudge to us. If we share what we have, could we too take our part in demonstrating God's abundance? Could we accept the invitation that the crowd who received the bread and the fish didn't want to take? When we receive bread and wine in a few minutes, we receive the bread of life which comes down from heaven. We receive the promise of Jesus that whoever comes to him will never be hungry, and whoever believes in him will never be thirsty. And like the crowd who followed Jesus across the lake twice, who saw Jesus heal and heard him teach and took the abundant bread he offered, when we receive bread and wine, Jesus offers to us an open door, the option of a new life offered but never compelled, in which we pray, "Give us today our daily bread," and in which we commit ourselves to sharing the abundance of God. I imagine Jesus saying to each of us, "Come receive the bread of heaven. Come receive the cup of God to renew you and reveal you in the image of the Lord, for a life of true abundance where no tyrant wields the rod. At my table there is freedom, O beloved child of God. Go in peace to love each other. Go in hope to share your bread. You who tasted heaven's banquet now must see that all are fed. For the life of God incarnate to the broken world is wed. From my table rise to service, nourished for the work ahead."